of the month. I have no idea. I'll ask Councillor Chapel who lives there.
But not now.
Yes.
Are we open running? Fantastic. So, thank you very much indeed for coming or staying, as the case may be. I see you get my agenda up on screen. There we go. So, any apologies for absence?
I've had apologies from Councillor Hutton.
Lovely. We're happy to accept that. Absolutely. Thank you very much. Declarations of interest, pecuniary or otherwise? No. Fantastic. Thank you very much indeed. Any representations from interested parties? Considerations of requests? Almost finished. To approve and sign the minutes of the meeting on the 12th of October. Are there any points that anyone wants to raise about those? No? Fantastic. Okay, we're happy that I signed those. That's great. I shall do so. Lovely. Then to receive the month's accounts for October 2021. I was getting confused by this because there's no single piece of paper saying accounts October 2021. And so, that's what one bit of paper is saying. So the balance sheet, the bank balance is down. Have we got more coming in soon? We've got a preset payment.
Preset should have come in by now. It came towards the end of October.
Okay, that's fine. Just in case, anything from anyone about anything on the balance sheet? Right, lovely. Thank you very much indeed. To reconsider the decision to allocate Section 106 funding to Fletton Field. Do you want me to explain this, Emma, or do you want to?
You can explain it.
Okay. As I recall, 2 years ago.
2018.
2018. First thing I did. We agreed to support the idea of funding some of the purchase of Fletton Field, and we agreed to use some Section 106 money to do that. Clearly, things have moved and not moved on in the meantime. And at some point quite soon, is it 22nd of May?
No, 6th of May.
6th of May next year, that Section 106 money disappears. Yeah.
Well, we'll be asked leading up to that.
So we need to decide whether we're going to keep it towards paying for Fletton Field, but Fletton Field may not be up for sale in that timescale or at all, or whether we need to do something else with it, which seems relatively prudent.
Yeah, we've also allocated 25,000 from a fund that we had that we called NCC, which is when we thought there could be services devolved and the library was going to close and one thing and another.
And that hasn't got any particular ties to it, does it?
No, I mean, no, it was just a fund that we added into the budget of that year.
So effectively there's £95,208 in the budget that may be spent on Fletton Field between now and May, but it seems unlikely. And if it isn't, some of it needs to be spent somewhere else. But the limitations on 70,208 are off-site play.
It's adult and youth, I think it was outdoor play equipment.
It's adult
Not play equipment, outdoor.
Off-site youth and adult play space contribution, provision of off-site play space. And do we need to check with NNC what counts as that?
At the time, I did check because I'd already checked to see if we could use it to upgrade the skate park, and that was agreed. But then it was decided for Fletton Field. But the person that now deals with the Section 106 money at NNC, because obviously it's all different, she just said, we would just have to approach them again and then they would have to discuss it and decide whether we could or not.
So there are various outdoor play space things being discussed at the moment on estates, but 25,000 of that isn't tied to play space. So it could be a bit of a windfall. Do we need to decide, or do we just need to be aware?
I think you need to decide, because before you know it, it will be Christmas. And so and then you're into January and you're into, well, technically, because 5 months to spend £70,000 on something that has to be approved beforehand by NNC doesn't give you a lot of time.
Dennis, first time.
I think there's been.
Oh, I thought your hand was up, sorry.
What do the Fletton Field group think our commitment to them is?
I have had a very brief conversation with someone about this, and I think the view is the playing field has changed, because previously there was an attempt to sell Fletton Field, and we were having to bid for it. With the change to Northbourne Hants and the consideration of talk of Jubilee Field and everything else, it's a very different landscape. The other point is, if we did decide to effectively revoke this money, it's not due to a lack of support of Fletton Field, it's the fact that we don't spend it, it would disappear. So I think the Fletton Field group would be quite happy with us doing something else with it. The question would be, I suppose, do we have a moral obligation, if Fletton Field did go back on the market, to find another 95,000 from somewhere else? But that's more of an imponderable, because that's outside of our control. But if we don't do something with it, we will potentially lose it, which would seem rather useful. David?
Well, we simply can't lose the money for the taxpayers of Arundel when there is so much that could usefully be done with it. So I suggest that we prioritise the skate park, because that's going to be a major area in which it will be spent. I seem to recall that they wanted to do something with the basketball area.
That's been approved.
We approve that.
But could we not use some of this 70,000 to fund it? I know we've agreed to do it, but could we not use the funding?
I think it's not a huge amount of money.
It wasn't
So it's 2.5.
It wasn't
Yeah.
so money.
It's not a huge
It's
amount.
not 2.5,
but it
Yeah, I
shows-
know, but I don't
Shows
know.
the views.
I mean, presumably it can be used for multiple projects, because we may not have a single project that would reach £70,000 without.
I'm
doing
not
something
sure.
completely different.
And I'm not sure, because you're just filling hot, well, you just
No,
maintain.
we've
No,
got
it was the backboard, wasn't it?
backboard,
Backboard,
fence, etc. So it's an enhancement
Yeah,
of the existing structure.
I don't know, I'd have to check with them, but
I mean, that would be part of the shopping list potentially. There's work to the, I might call the small children's play area, I suppose, on the
Yes.
rec.
Mm-hmm.
Whether, if there's still money left, there is anything that could be done on St Christopher's Drive play area, bearing in mind the development that's going to be going on in that part of the world.
There's a move came forward in the last couple of months for accessible play equipment.
that's what I was just going to
And
say.
then putting something in the rec and St Christopher's Drive would seem
Yeah.
appropriate rather than just one. That would seem a sensible idea.
That would
And
probably
that could eat
knock
up.
a significant hole in.
Well, I was going to say, what you could do is, whereas you might have just been looking at something relatively, because I think, was it looking about taking a piece of the equipment out and putting a piece in that was,
Either doing that or adding
Yeah.
one extra. Yeah.
so you could perhaps think a little bit more about something,
Yeah.
you know.
Was it specific to youth or adults and not children?
It's youth and, well, I don't
That's
think
the only
it's,
thing. I'm just thinking.
I think,
is
I
it
think they
more-
use youth and adult to cover all,
so it's anything.
Presumably youth is everything
Yeah.
that isn't an adult,
yeah.
unless they have an artificial
They-
distinction somewhere down the line about a child.
Off-site youth and adult play space contribution.
That's
So
what
play
talks,
space.
but that talks to me about things near the other side of the library on the work, you know, those gym equipment things, you have a bit of a circuit and they
Yeah,
go
yeah,
to
yeah,
one
yeah.
that's in there. That's the thing I was thinking, that's youth, that'd be youth and adult as opposed to children's play equipment, there's two differentials. It's what that definition is at the end. See,
One of the nice things about accessible play equipment is
That's a lot of that.
wheelchair users.
That's why a lot of that equipment now is designed specifically for, I would probably move that towards the rec area. Maybe. But that's I know that's not, no, I don't mean move that, I mean in relation to the,
So is the view that we should use that 70,208 to other projects, including possibly basketball, play equipment and skate park funding. Allowing the 25,000 to go elsewhere.
I think you should leave the 25,000 out of the equation for the moment, because that's not the issue,
And that's not a time limit.
and it's not time limited.
Okay.
What we should also perhaps do is ask estates as a matter of urgency to look at whether there are any other forward budget.
This,
Doesn't seem to be very likely that the skate park upgrade would be paid for by that date either.
it doesn't necessarily need to be, but
I thought
if,
you just said isn't that when it has to be spent by?
no, but if the advice we've been given about the skate park, which is to come up with a plan, we've got a consultation meeting next Tuesday in here. Come up with a plan, find a partner we like working with, which could happen in the next 2 or 3 months, and then potentially we could presumably give them a start with some of that money, and then find grant funding for the rest. So I'm sure there's ways of.
That's interesting.
The only thing with that is, it is the timescale is extremely tight, because you're also looking at getting funding from elsewhere as well. Because obviously, if you use some of it for basketball courts, some for accessible play equipment, you're potentially only going to leave yourself with about 40,000, which isn't going to go very far.
No, and I think any skate park work would have to be that it's entirely based on the success of raising grant funding. And if that doesn't happen, we have to scale back our plans or not do it. But you know, that's the best option on the table, unless anyone's got another one at the moment.
I can find out. Tomorrow if we could use it to pay for lots of different things that we want, and whether they're okay with that, and sort of talk about the accessible play equipment, basketball refurbishments, or I could say we are looking to completely upgrade our skate park, which is obviously going to cost more than this. So we would be looking to use that money and then go out and get grants. And if they say, yes, that's fine, but I say we are, with COVID and everything else, we're struggling.
So there might need to be an
They
extension.
might allow a bit more time.
Cool.
If we say that's what we earmarked it
We
for.
can't see the other option really, so.
Unless we develop some form of plan B.
Do you want me to try the skate park thing first?
You could do it.
Because if she comes back and says, no, you won't get an extension, blah, 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 then we'll have to really seriously think
I
about
was
it.
in contact with Russ, the guy who Lisa and I were speaking to a few months ago, because I'm going down to Poole tomorrow. And that's where one of their big skate parks is, so I'll pop and see it. And he says, grant funding is buoyant at the moment. And he was suggesting that we could get grants for the whole lot. So I think that's, if we can then put something into it and then get that as well, then happy days. And anything I talked to the users about next week would be entirely on the basis that it would depend on grant funding. We can't fund the whole thing.
Can I ask with my slip my book? Did we get a costing for the resurfacing of the basketball? Or were we just going to build? I thought we were going to, weren't we? But
I think we were trying to, but then when we came back with a
yeah.
specific pricing. So that could be one we go back to.
We approved something at a full council meeting. Don't
was
think October, I think it was September one.
Yeah, but it wasn't full, it was patching.
It was patching, yeah. I'm going to say it was.
I don't think Lisa ever managed to get someone to give us a quote.
Well, can I sort of come back to David's point, and Councillor was pointing out bringing it back to the States, and we'll look to do anything there with regard to that certainty to push forward.
But we've already done one approval on it, so you'd have to.
Yes.
But so you'll have, because we've approved
The basketball
yeah, at that cost, you then have to revisit that, and you'll have to do that formally.
The tarmac patching wasn't.
Yeah,
So we've got
I,
one till June.
I think it's worth me finding out about the skate park thing. And then, and I think the accessible play equipment, you could do very well at spending that.
You need some of that quite easily.
Uh,
And that would be appropriate in the adult and youth area as well. So if they're willing to let us mix and match accordingly, that would be great. And if we get a bit of an extension on the
Yeah.
skate park, then that's perfect.
I'll see if I can get something this week so that I can get it on, because obviously this will then need to go on to next week, yeah.
Okay. So we've reconsidered that. 2103, further considered budget for 22-23. And there it is. I've got a few suggestions, but I don't want to hog the floor. Does anyone else want to add or say anything about anything at all?
Car park rent. So there's 5,000 going 2021, 22, and then same
Which
again.
Which line are we on?
Just looking at 5,082.
5,000 again, in 21, 22. And I wondered, we've been talking a bit about how there may be commitments under the lease which say these have to be done. Because to spend 5,000 and 5,000 seems quite a lot, but if that's to meet commitments under the lease, then you don't particularly have a choice. And then going
So
up to
we're talking about-
32,000, which I assume is the work we've kind of agreed.
So the Herne Road, 32,000, line 88, item 5082. Someone mentioned we have to do something for the lease.
Well, it's just that I had a telephone call from our landlord who's said that he thought we were in breach of our lease because we hadn't been maintaining the car park. He talked about the hedge, and I think Lisa has got a quote for that. Yeah, and I think has been getting quotes for the damage to the roots and refurbishment of the tarmac, and I think she's also got a line painting quote, or is in the process.
She's in the process.
Yeah.
So is that 32 to cover all of that work, or is it
Plus the 5.
plus the 5?
It's just to
is-
what extent, I like to understand whether we're committed
Sorry, quick question, Liz, where's the 5?
in this current year,
Oh, right.
which appears not to be, that spent, is it?
No.
No. Yeah, it does seem a lot.
37,000 over 2 years for a car park,
Quite a lot of damage by trees. And that.
Oh, I know there is. I know, there's.
And that's only going to get worse.
Yeah. How long is the lease? Is it 6 more years?
I think it's a bit more than that. I think we've got 7 or 8.
So I guess if Lisa is in train to get all of those quotes, then that's probably the sum of what we need to do, as long as that's going to cover the lease commitments as well as some work that we've chosen to do. There's nothing to hidden, presumably, whether we've got the line painting done, for example. But if he's going to make a fuss about the hedge, then we have to make sure that that's definitely done. So I hope we'll have an opportunity to revisit that, I suppose.
Yeah, just going back to basics. When do we need to come up with the final numbers on this? Is it tonight? Is it December?
I would say you've probably got one more meeting in December
So
to then approve full council in December, because we have to get the precept sent off by the 14th of January.
So if that 32 were to come in as high or low in the next couple of weeks, we can adjust.
Well, I see it
Or we can
as, I
reconsider.
see it as 37 now. It's, the timeframes now are so tight that I don't know how much of that 5,000 would be spent even, so.
But can we carry that money over to next year?
Well, I'd like to have a conversation. about
Yeah,
this.
I mean, if you know if you know that you need to do the work,
Mm.
you've got the money sitting in a budget that you haven't spent, I think you should consider carrying it over. If you know you're going to need that plus more,
Yeah.
rather than completely starting a
Yeah.
whole new budget.
Absolutely.
Because it's in there to
So,
understand
yeah,
this
so it's
year.
to what extent it's 37 or whether it's 32 or it's neither of those or, yeah.
Yeah.
Because 37 seems a lot.
It does. So we need to come back and revisit that figure.
I think you'll be shocked at the tarmac.
I'm sure we will.
You
Well,
know,
the fact that they aren't bothered to come back to us
That's a lot of
asking
money,
for it because it's too cheap.
Costs a lot of money in the ground.
Yeah, but they've done the tree roofs though, haven't they?
no, nothing's
Oh,
been
No,
done.
they just chop the tops off, but there's talk.
Yeah, they've got to dig it out, cut them off, and put a membrane in to stop them coming through.
Any other points at all, in general?
Yeah.
Go on then. Give us a line.
So 5130,
So recreation around R&M.
so that's largely, I assumed, the skateboard park, and I'm not happy that that's covered by the precept, so I don't see that number being in here at all in this column.
The only thing, I don't think it's got anything to do with the skate park, as far as I know.
Play equipment.
It's, yeah, I mean, when we had that problem with the Flying Fox recently, that was pricey.
Was it one?
It was £90.
85,000,
No, we've got a different line. 950, 130.
5130, I've got 85,000 in the
I'm
proposed
I'm
budget.
on my change one. No, the 85,000, that's obviously been running from the skate park. So that should go out of the process, in my opinion. That should be grant funding.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Or,
so-
well, now we know we've got a little
Or
bit of
with a
money.
bit more as well.
I'm
But I think-
happy for that.
Yeah. At that level of expenditure is too much for the precept, so I think we should take 85 out. In my magic numbers I've put on here, I've left 5,000 in for standard repairs and maintenance.
Yeah.
Because when it goes wrong down there, it's pricey.
Do you want the 85,000 out, or do you want £85,000 potential income, which negates it?
I think take it out at the moment.
Well, we need
We
any
are gonna
budget,
look for
we
it
need
to try and
any
pay
budget,
more.
like you said, 5,000 or whatever.
Yeah,
Maybe that's
at
what it
least
is.
5 in.
But I don't think it should be in the precept column.
Just to the Herne Park lease is runs out the 11th of March 2029.
So 7.5 years.
Yeah.
And if we break the terms of the lease, it's bad, obviously morally, but are there financial penalties as well? Or?
Well,
Taking it to its extreme.
it's tricky because there's a bit of, well, we don't want to be
No, absolutely.
We
I'm
don't
not
want
suggesting
to be
we are,
breaking,
I mean, it's-
you know. breaching our lease or being accused of breaching our
Yeah,
lease.
absolutely.
So do you want me to tell that red bit out, all the red bits that you're going to be covering? If you're happy, that's £5,000 now.
Oh, it's the red, sorry, my eyes on
It's just that was your £90,000 less the current budget, which is what you were.
Yeah, I think so. Because
The
I
idea is-
think that has to be grant funded with the 70,000 or whatever it is from the section 106. It doesn't need to appear in the precept. And it will be, you know, those numbers I said out yesterday, £66 on an average house is too much for.
But that's what we did with the boardwalk. That was paid with Section 106 money and a grant.
Yeah, and that seems a sensible way to go. I've suggested on quite a few of them that we zero rate things rather than give them a rise, and I'm quite happy to go through it line by line if you want, which,
When you put things at zero,
no, so in other words, rather than increasing them, just keep them at this year's spend.
Oh, we're
I'm
not
happy.
on 3%, not on 3%.
On some, I'm happy to explain my logic and then we can decide, but that just seemed a way of going through the detail. I managed to get everything down by 18 to 18% rather than whatever the preset price at the moment is.
Doesn't 3% give us a
I think you need to
buffer?
be careful
Yeah,
for not having
3% give us a
anything.
buffer
Mm,
with everything else that's going on in expenditure generally.
mm.
What did you allow on electricity and gas, for example?
Well, I think I've increased it.
Good.
Do you want me to go through them bit by bit and just
So
I think you
Jerry's
should,
worried.
yeah.
He's
Yeah,
worried.
let's
He's a worried
start
man.
line 5001, market, R&M and special works. I left that at 515.
So do you want me to change?
Where I want
things?
to be on here. What you want?
5001 there.
Right at the top.
Right.
Yeah, right at the top. I haven't touched the income figures.
Market,
No, leave
R&M,
them.
special works, you've got
So-
what, 5 what?
515.
Unchanged.
Unchanged from that,
Unchanged.
okay.
He saved us £15 there.
Yep.
Well, there's
absolutely.
2 cups of coffee for beans.
Do you want me to make a change and put that in?
I'm quite happy. I've done it on this sheet. I can change it. People disagree. How would you like?
Well, it's up to everyone, it's not my budget, it's your budget.
You're the keeper of
But
the.
the rationale, for increasing it by 3%.
Well,
is
you can fiddle about with that one because I've got that one here unchanged. If
This is a live document.
it all goes awfully wrong,
Yeah.
then
That's-
we've got mine and we can
We've got
start
backup.
again.
Yeah. I've also got the original copy of the intent.
So you want that as 515?
515. I left 5002 at 500. Since we haven't spent it.
Which was anyway, yeah.
The next one, 503, I've left at 25. Since
2005, not 2546.
Let's say it was 46.
2,500.
2,500.
That's all.
Christmas market, I went to 7.5 rather than 8.
So the Christmas market, there's a question on that because that's cost neutral.
What's
We're trying to get the income and expenditure the same, so whatever we bring in. So if you want to increase your Christmas market to bring in 10 grand next year, put in £10,000 for expenditure as well. If that's what you want
We're
to do.
going to go to make a profit on it,
No.
basically.
Yeah, it's,
Well,
yeah,
break even, then.
Yeah.
So if you change to 7.5 for expenditure,
Mhm.
have the income 7.5, or have it at 8,000, or
Okay, well,
10,000.
Or whatever,
So-
whichever people
So
think.
that's effectively cost neutral.
I think you should just leave that as the 8, yeah.
Okay. I just worried it match appears in preset, that's fine.
But it'll even out with the income.
Cemetery general rates, I put that at 656, is that what it is up there?
Cemetery general
Right, they
rates.
generally didn't touch any rates. Yeah, why is it not to 800?
Because 2021 at 618, 2022 at 712, and with all of these, they can go up significantly, we don't know yet. So rather than I make a loss on the rates, I always err on the side of getting more money in.
You don't think I'll choose that one? It's all about your calculation. Never mind, okay. Grave digging,
So happy with that freighting still?
yeah, I'm not quite sure why mine's changed. Grave digging, 309, why are we increasing?
Because if anyone digs a grave, it's 300 quid.
Mhm.
So more than one. And we had one back in 2019, it wasn't in the last 2 years, but one person, and there you go. If someone needs to use a grave digger,
Right,
and we found that out.
I suppose with the £18 versus the £9 make a difference.
No. Well, I don't know how much grave digging's gone up since 2019.
Okay.
Might have gone up
I went
£9.
309 on that one.
So you want that at 309?
It's up to everyone else if they think that's a good idea or a bad idea.
I will change it unless anyone
Just carry on.
comments. Yeah.
Is that per dig?
So is that
Per dig? £309 per dig.
Yeah. It's not cheap going.
Churchyard R&M, left that
You're
500.
keeping the cemetery warden in.
No, I've put that, again, that was just an idea and we haven't discussed it or talked about it. I think having spent even more time down there, we can start to keep an eye on it.
I personally think that is extremely low, and I always have done, because we always tend to spend more money. There's paths in there that have got trip hazards on them. I mean, I know the wall has sort of come out of the blue, but huge amounts of money could be spent on that wall. In my view,
Sorry, we're
if
talking
you've got a
about cemetery,
churchyard.
Okay, I think we're talking about the cemetery.
I thought we were talking about Warden.
I thought we were talking about the wall.
Oh, talk about the wall, no, sorry.
I put the wall number in later on, but we could put it in there as well. So the idea of having someone who keeps an eye on the cemetery, does some odd jobs, etc., and all I've done is match it against the outside amenities job at the moment, just for budgetary purposes. But that was just a suggestion.
So, again, what
Well,
figure?
depends what-
Is this somebody that we would be employing? So a new employee?
Potentially, maybe not a new employee, but maybe someone on a ad hoc basis, a stipend. I don't know how it would work. Because again, apart from you mentioning,
General support at the state.
yeah. So, and that seemed like a reasonable level of someone to keep an eye on it. And maybe
Is that on top of the grass cutting
yes.
contract?
So that's an extra. But at the moment, it's 5,000 in there, which was a number I mentioned last month. And I was just thinking 3,354 seemed more reasonable number if it was one person. But again, this is just an idea.
And I'll change things. Do you want it as 500 or 3,354? Did you say?
I'd leave it at £5,000 because you'd be surprised that
Yeah.
one person is not going to make a hell of a lot of difference.
I don't think one person needs to make a difference, but I think just having a pair of eyes down there would make a difference. A secretary here, something there would make a difference. Because at the moment, it's not so much. Again, it's just an idea. We're just talking about the budget. So, we can leave it at 5,000 if you want. That's fine. Churchyard R&M, you put the wall in there. I think that's important. What sort of figure would we?
Well, I don't know because it's huge, but
Do we know
I
how
think
much?
this is potentially a fund that you should be building
Every year.
into
Yeah.
each year because 500, well, it's
No, it doesn't.
you know, you're lucky if you don't have anything, but
Do we know how much the repairs cost to that wall?
what the damage bit,
Yeah.
that was 10,000.
It's only 10,000 a year. It seems a sensible amount, unfortunately, because stonework is pricey.
And I think you make the decision that if you don't spend it, it carries over.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So you're building that fund up.
Yeah, create a reserve.
And potentially, because there's a wall on the cemetery as well. I mean,
Yeah, and that's not looking great.
it's bulging out a bit. I know that's true. So you know, whether you have a set like a wall
A
fund.
wall fund.
So that's
The
10,000.
For the moment, yeah.
Yeah.
For a second, I'll put that in somewhere else. So it's okay. I haven't touched any rates because obviously that's outside our control and then we go up. The home part, 32,000 we've touched on. DH car park, R&M, what am I colouring against this? I don't know why it's that colour, but never mind. We touched on electric, 5107 and 5108, the electric and water at the toilets. I suppose the question is, do we think that increase is enough? If they are fixed rates, is it too much? I just thought it was worth having a discussion about that. Because obviously water is an issue, but electricity is a huge issue.
As you can see with the water, it's gone from about 1,000, and you throw in nearly 4,000 in 1 year.
Is that leaks, do we think? Or?
We thought there were probably leaks and they've been fixed, but it seems to be recurrent. So I don't know whether that is leaks still.
Do we know where the water meter is?
We know where it is.
Yeah.
Yes, and we've checked the water meter reading. And Robbie does it regularly now.
Because it could be an underground leak.
Yeah.
There's also been problems. The automatic flush things have broken, so then you'll have a continual flush and that sort of thing. Yeah.
It can be a lot of cubic yards. So it certainly isn't prudent to cut those. It's whether you think they're enough.
So any changes on any of those?
I've left them as they are, but I think we need to be careful. The toilets, they're now on a fixed
So sorry,
rate for electricity.
they're not going to be less than the projected 21-22, which on the one I'm looking at, they are currently. It's 3.5 projected, 3 in the budget.
I suppose it depends on whether we think we fix the leaks or not.
We
So-
think we fixed the leaks, but you don't know until the next bill comes through and find out there's been another leak.
Mm.
Yeah.
This is where we always try and err on the side of it's probably going to cost us more than we think.
Yeah, exactly.
So on that basis, does that lead to the next line as well, 5109, the refurbishment budget? Because certainly from my wide experience of public toilets the last couple of months, ours are pretty good, but if they're costing us £5,000 in water a year, they're pretty bad. But do we have an appetite for £67,000 for a full refurbishment when there's pressure everywhere else, or do we reduce that figure for a lesser refurbishment? Liz?
I have an appetite for reopening the discussion of selling the toilets.
Mm-hmm. Anyone else have views on selling the toilets or not selling the toilets? David?
I think that would probably be one of the hottest potatoes that we've seen in this town for some time. My view is that there would be a public outcry at the idea of them disappearing.
Not disappearing, selling.
Well, but selling them to a commercial operator who would operate them as such. Is there a likelihood of somebody doing?
Well, we had the
Yeah.
Clean for Shore guy come forward, offered to pay for them, offered to buy them, and he would leave just a couple of toilets at one end that he would then look after and maintain. And the other part of it, I think he was going to turn it into a
Yes,
place
so,
where he was selling.
so it's not a
cleaning
like for like. I mean, it's not the case that the current block would stay exactly as it is, but under different ownership. It would be a reduced service in effect.
Still toilets.
Still toilets, but whether that's as good. I certainly wouldn't want to do that without maybe going out to the public and actually trying to get a feel for what their view was. Mine is that actually there are remarkably few public facilities anywhere, and that losing them and losing control of them would not be a good idea.
Now, maybe that's for the halfway house of not a full glitzy refurbishment, but something that's a bit more functional as a halfway house. I don't know. Is that something a state should chew over in 2 weeks' time?
Looks like it.
5120, occupation road clubs, R&M, since we've spent not a huge amount down there, because there's not much to spend on it. I put that at 500. Recreation.
Which one's 500 on this one?
5120.
5120.
20.
5130, I've put
Sorry.
5130, I've put at 5,000 still.
Yes.
Yeah, it was going down.
I was going down.
And again, there could be an argument that that's
Yeah.
too much, but when things go wrong, they're expensive.
It's tricky because you just never know. You know, a piece of equipment can break and it might only be 500 or all of a sudden
1900,
it's,
absolutely.
yeah.
Well, it kind of takes you back to that whole idea of do you just have a contingencies budget and put in a sum in that which you think will cover whatever you might need to spend wherever you might need to spend it. And half the time we operate with one, and half the time we've operated without one. I'm not sure what the right answer is. Liverpool has a view
A
on
contingency
having a
budget.
contingency budget,
It's effectively
simply
we've got
dipping
lots of
into
things.
it rather than trying to come
Split
up
it
with all
across.
these mini little budgets.
Well, I know we've set up the budgets a number of times and before council decided they want to change it, and they've changed it back, and they've changed it back.
Keep like this, please.
Yeah.
But effectively, that's what we're doing. isn't
What
it?
you
They're
can
mini
get to this is
contingencies.
history. So you know how much you've been spending on all of these for the past however long. So you know what you spent on recreation, ground repairs and maintenance, some science repairs and maintenance and so on, as opposed to just a pot of it.
Well, yes, I think If you did it, you'd have to have a breakdown
Yes.
at the end of the year to show where your contingencies went for
Yeah.
that very reason.
This,
I say, I look at it, I don't look at individual years, and that looks like 18,000 to me. And that seems a lot. I'm very happy, I'm very, very happy to run designated reserves. That's how I do it. But I wouldn't have 18,000 in my designated reserves for recreation ground youth activities. I'm happy to have 10,000.
Well, on
You've
my
already
next-
got that precepted for this year.
on my next line, I've got 5131, 3,000. So I suspect that with the basketball court and the idea of a skate park coming, we can actually reduce that 10,000 down quite a lot. So I've got 3,000 as a nominal figure, which is a reserve of 8,000 for the recreation.
So over
So
21, 22, 22, 23 in total, what have you put in?
I've just dealt with 22, 23. So I haven't touched this year's budget. So for 22, 23, I've got 5,000 in for recreation and R&M.
Yeah.
And 3,000 for youth activities. I'm 5131.
And left in 10. So you're still, as I say, to me, the individual years are kind of,
But some of that
they're
10
so artificial.
some of that 10 has been spent, hasn't it?
Mm.
Which is
Some has, yeah.
And if, let's say, for example, the accessible play equipment needs to come out of one of these budgets, then it won't be 10. And if it doesn't need to come out of it, section 106, then you can revisit this later down the line. But at the moment, they're all unknowns, aren't they?
If you remember, the 10,000 was one of the figures I think that came when we were sort of rounding up the percentage increase of the budget, and I think we got a spare bit of money that we then put into those youth activities, because we hadn't got anything specific, but we did think that there would be a few things.
And then obviously the appetite for Prince William and elsewhere is that there should be something. But if we've got the section 106 money and we see the skate park as an ambition that we think we can solve elsewhere, I think we can drop that down for this year.
Yeah, and I think because the way this council runs the budget is it almost starts again. We've not carried lots of reserves over and had pots of money sitting for various things. So that's why, although you've got 10,000 sitting in 21, 22, you then end up with a general reserve, but then you start your budget again. So you're going down through the figures again.
Clearly, I've already stated I don't agree with that approach, but yeah, exactly. Which is why at the very end of this, we need to look at the general reserve as well.
5137 recreation ground, Rockingham Hills. I went back to 515 just to keep it as it is at the moment. 5146 bold statement. Do we need a telephone at Eastwood Road? £385 a year.
that's the broadband as well. So we send them emails.
Yeah.
Okay. It just, going back to the handbook we looked at earlier, lone workers, they've got to have a mobile phone with them, so presumably.
They have the mobile phone, but we don't. They have an iPad where emails and things go to that they take photos and send back to us, and so.
But if, for example, we paid, I've got unlimited data on my SIM, which is £20 a month. If we gave someone an unlimited SIM data, they could do all of that for less money. It was just a point of possible saving. But it's entirely up to everyone else what they think. 5180.
If you want me to change it, then I'll do it. Otherwise,
Well-
If there's no appetite for it, that's fine.
No, I think no.
It just felt
I don't
expensive.
think the budget stays or falls on £400.
Yeah, fair enough. But that's lots of £400. 5180, we've got 15,000 there for the Jones Stroll Centre. And I think I may or may not be correctly reflecting this. The view from the States is that we don't necessarily want to spend £15,000 on it at the moment, but I might be wrong.
We don't want to spend.
Can we just clarify?
I think, isn't that to bring it up to the EPC?
It is, but are we right in thinking that the only reason we need the UPC to hit C and D is to renew the lease? Or,
Yeah.
so in other words, if we keep the lease running, we don't need to do that at the moment. And I think the other danger is that 15,000, the quotes that Lisa had at the moment, may not get it to C.
The only problem with that is if,
And then a new heating system.
yeah, is if at any point the scouts need to get funding for whatever reason, they might struggle because they don't have a lease, which is why the museum have been pushing for their lease.
Absolutely.
So I wouldn't, you don't want to just say, no, you don't want to do it because they've got a rolling lease. You've probably got to think about your tenant as well.
No, I think that's a fair point, but I think that the bigger danger is it's a large leaky building, and the EPC figures we were shown, lots of new lights and lots of new radiators, won't get it to where it needs to be, and it probably needs insulation, and that's going to be tens of thousands of pounds. So 15,000 potentially is a spend that A, we may not need to make, and B, may not touch the science of what we might need to do. I suppose the other question is the Joan Strong Centre an off-site youth activity in the grand scheme of things, if we had to spend some section 106, but for me at least, I think the estate.
Well, I'm not sure about whether you would be able to do that because.
For me at least, it struck me that was £15,000 that we could maybe do without, but Liz.
I'd like to discuss selling the James Strong Centre as well as the toilets. I know it's controversial, David, but
I said that one was a hockey
because I've already had my head
There's
bitten
a
off
lot
by
of
Val.
scouts and guides. We
I've
would
already
have
had my
nowhere
head
to
bitten off by
go.
Val, but I just don't. There's a film or something called The Money Pit, isn't there? Where he's trying to build a house and all he does is spend money on an asset that will never repay it. To house the scouts, they could come here.
But they were moved, weren't they, at one point?
They can
They were Occupation Road, weren't they?
It's their storage. They've got 3 garages
storage.
full of equipment. I don't know where we would put that.
But we've got to sell it to the scouts for £1.
Yeah.
They're happy and we're happy.
You could do.
It's okay.
That's actually not patched out.
And then so they are, because if it was theirs, they wouldn't need, I suppose we might need the EPC to sell it.
No, but it'd be there, well, I suppose we'd sell it as it is, and it's their liability to do whatever they want with it. But is that worth having that conversation
They might get funding if
through the Scouts Association?
more easily than we would to refurbish it. In fact,
They're probably a charity, aren't they, the Scouts?
Yeah.
Each one as an individual
They each run as an individual
charity.
unit, don't they?
I don't know.
It's an
how
ownership organisation.
I mean, is it worth at least having a conversation before we throw 15,000 into this budget? A, do they want those changes made? Because I know Val was very strong on the fact that they didn't want their heating system changed because they'd chosen it for a certain reason.
Oh, that's right, yeah, she did
To
say that.
football and something or else.
Yeah.
But at least talk to them about what they'd like to do. If they're desperate for new lights and it does all the job.
I don't think they're desperate for anything to be done. It's just
on
whether
the
they
kitchen.
ever, it's just if they need to get funding for anything related, they're going to need to show that they've got a lease for anything related to that.
And the question for us is, the elephant in the room is, would we consider selling it to the Scouts? They're the only ones that really.
And it would have to stay with the Scouts.
Huh?
There might be lots of reasons why that couldn't happen. So, for my money, I'd put that 15,000 in my little sheet down here into the walls in the churchyard.
Mhm.
So for me, I'd take that 15,000 out at the moment and see what comes. But that's just me. It's entirely.
If you do sell it for £1, you still have the option of saying it's yours for £1, but if you sell it, then we
Well, there'd be an overage clause,
Overage.
exactly, so if they then sell it for
For development.
bearing in mind
Next
where it's at.
door.
Next door.
Next door.
So, yeah, you'd have to do that if you were going to sell.
same with the toilets.
So can this committee ask estates to have that conversation with the Scouts? Is that?
I think
Probably
it should
not.
be, I think it should be a full
have to go to
council.
full council
That's fine.
to decide whether
Yeah,
we start having those kind of discussions.
Yeah, that's fine.
It's huge.
and it's also, I mean, you know, selling an asset, I think there's a lot more things. You can't just sell assets like that without consultation.
No, I'm not suggesting we do that. I'm just suggesting that if we start having a conversation about all the various options, that 15,000 may not need to be in there for next year. That's my suggestion. Yes.
And I believe at the end of this, we're going to see that there's a general reserve greater than is required under good audit practice. I would happily say 15,000 of what is already in general reserves gets earmarked, 20,000, whatever, for if it doesn't work out that way with the Jones Strong Centre, eventually we would need to put the building right. It's just not appropriate to be running buildings that are so substandard. So you have to at some point.
Either upgrade it or get shot.
So don't precept it, but if there's some money within the general reserve that isn't earmarked for something else, let's earmark it now and say, we know something has to happen with the
Yeah,
Jones
no,
Strong
absolutely.
Centre.
But that seems a sensible way forward.
The general reserve figure, I mean, there's no rule that says what you should or shouldn't
It's
have.
good at audit practice though, isn't it?
But it depends, I mean, like, it's between 3 and 6 months,
Yeah.
what you choose to have.
But that's the reserve for expenditure. I think as long as your reserves aren't more than double your precept, you're okay.
Yeah.
And
But
that
if
precept
we,
will be,
and if we start earmarking them, then they usually take a different approach anyway. You know?
Yeah.
It's general reserves becoming too high that creates a conversation with your auditor. If you've got reserves and you say, yeah, but we already know, you know, the Jones Strong Centre is going to cost us 25,000, or we'll sell it and then we'll release the 25,000 back and reduce the precept in another year. You know, it ain't a hard conversation.
no,
Yeah, and a strategic view like that is something that those conversations could feed into. It might be in 2 years' time we decide we didn't spend it and we put it aside, but it doesn't need to be in the
Rather than
precept.
precept it
Yeah,
now, try and
So
find the
just
money
for the
to
sake
pay
of
the
argument,
reserves.
let's not 5,180 down to 0.
So
Grants.
he can
Something like
work
that.
down. Yes, can we have some in there?
Yeah,
I think we need to have some in there.
Okay, what do you want? What do we, should we take 3,000
Yeah,
Yeah,
at the moment?
well, I'm comfortable with that.
Grants, I left arts grants at 3,000. Nice round figure, and I left community support at 12,360.
Yeah.
The QVH, I know we haven't had a conversation with Councillor Fuller yet about his plans, but I threw 40,000 in last time as a possible number. I think there's a lot of use for QVH, but talking to someone recently, it's very easy that we could throw something at it that wasn't quite right. So that, to me, seems to be a good place that we have those conversations. I know Creative End will have ideas, other people have ideas, and we say that we will try and improve the AV in the QVH, but we will grant fund it as best we can. So I've
So
got
now
mine.
51.
take it out.
51 is
I've got that down
isn't
to,
it?
well, no,
51 is
that's-
just how it runs.
that's 51 including the 40,000. I
Oh,
think.
is that?
Yeah.
so
So I got that down to 11,086,01. So we have an ambition to improve the
The
AV.
running cost.
So we just continue
Yeah.
supporting.
There's some
What did
running costs
what
that
do
you
you
have
know
to
about the QH
cover.
up to?
11,086,01.
I think
11,086.
particularly after we've had a year or over a year where we've not had anybody in there, and it is gradually picking up. To spend that money now, you're not going to get an influx of whole loads of people.
And I think there's a lot of people who would benefit, and I think we can have lots of good conversations and be ambitious and plan ahead, but pulling grant funding from X, Y, and Z, lots of different sources, and make a brilliant job out of it, which is much more what we want it to be, but that might take some time, it might take some strategic research, but it's not on precepting.
No, because, you know, this is money that you're just giving to a trust in the town. It just so happens that the town council
Yeah,
are the
exactly.
trustees, but you
It's
are
quite large.
you are just giving money to trust.
Line,
So that bit, you bring this down to 22,172 on yours.
which line are we on, sorry?
It's on the
532.
QVH. What is your figure there now for the QVH?
I got it to 11,086, but I'm not sure how I've done that.
So you need to reduce that by 11,000 then. So I'll drop that down to 0.
It's got a calculation for some reason. The trial- I think I must have dropped the trial balance down on the QBN sheet. 5503, community safety, I put 200, a small reduction, but a bit more than we've spent so far this year. Snipe Meadow, I've put it 1,000, keep it like it is, because if we have cows, they'll cost about that, and we've had grants for some of the extra work in the meantime. So that shocking this figure of 3,000 doesn't need to be
So
there.
it's like whatever it's going then.
Just to 1,000, which is what it is this year. Tree works, we've got 4,000 in this year. We've said on the state that's probably not enough. We've got 6,000 on this budget. I suppose there's an argument that 6,000 after we spent a lot this year is going to be okay, but 2,000 of that is the tree survey. I think you might say that.
And look at costs.
Please, yeah, 3 years a grand.
So I think 6,000 is something we should maybe look to increase again, but
Yeah.
maybe revisit that in December once we know how good or bad the trees
Yeah,
are.
I definitely
We spent a lot on trees.
It's
the
an
last couple of
absolute
years.
minimum there, at 6.
Have you got the numbers for trees?
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's been 11.7. But then previous years we've spent less, so maybe 6 is fair.
And then suddenly there's 14,000
Mm.
so far this year.
Yeah, so maybe this year's just bad.
Yeah.
Um,
So keep that at 6.
keep it at 6 for the moment, I think, but come back and
If we
revisit
come
it.
back, yeah, if we find, wow,
5555, the environment.
I said, what is this? Sorry.
Well, this I think was how I mentioned wildflowers. I've suggested calling this, which is an idea that's come out from the councils, a climate change fund, which we can use in different ways. But we also have some Section 106 funds from Benefield Road, which are to be used for the maintenance, improvement or enhancement of public open spaces.
I thought we were drawing down on that.
We are.
Is
Yeah.
that for the verges?
Mm.
Okay. Fair enough then. But so I've changed that, climate change fund to 1,500, but it could be a smaller number than that. And it's something that we can talk about next week at full council about how we organise that and run it. And again, I don't think it needs to be very high, but it certainly doesn't need to be 2,000, so it couldn't be 1,000.
These are your figures for the 2.
No, I know, but that was just me talking aloud. I don't know whether it would appear on the spreadsheet.
Okay.
So let's make that 1,000 for the sake of argument.
1,000 and 1,500.
1,000. Sacrificed a few more wildflowers.
Yeah,
5607, £50 for consumables, rather than a small increase. Materials, line 5610, I kept that at 500, because a lot of the materials seem to go through the R&M budgets in different areas. So that doesn't seem to get hit so much each year. I've got a section on fuel, 1545, is that enough of an increase? But if we get electric power in a couple of years, it'll be fine.
It's quite expensive at the minute.
It is expensive at the minute, and we don't know if it's going to go up or go down, so is 1545 quite enough?
probably not.
Is it worth making that 1,600 just for the sake of argument,
Yeah.
revisiting?
Yeah.
Courthouse waste contract, I couldn't work out why this went up so much, but I don't think I need to worry.
So
I
we've got a
looked at
new,
2,000.
new contract started in August 2020.
Yeah, so it's a part year.
Cool. Items 6021, 6020 and 6021, courthouse, gas and electricity, the same question we had earlier, are we allowing enough of an increase? Just on that, I popped down through the courthouse the other day when I was going to see the museum, and nearly all the heating's electrical, isn't it? And it's all on very high thermostats, so this might be where some of the climate change budget comes in. If we're pumping lots of electricity into that building all the time, and it's paid for by us rather than by the people renting it, there's no incentive for them to,
Yeah.
I went into the gents' toilet, I don't spend all my time in toilets. And they were all on 6,
Okay.
and they were bleachingly hot.
Is that in communal areas? Well, we can turn the communal areas down.
Well, that's the thing, is do we actually need to say, we get the electricity's going to go up, and we can put measures in place to reduce demand, so maybe that's about right.
I mean, I don't think you could sort of mess about with their their actual rooms, but the communal areas.
Yes, you can, I mean, they were all on the top setting, and they were very hot. So maybe just leave that at 7725 for the moment.
And what about the gas? I think I was basing this on the gas and the electric, because we've changed.
Yeah.
I was basing it on the last 2 months' worth.
And
If
in
you want to
theory,
increase that,
well, I'd like to keep it the same, but in theory, they're fixed, aren't they? So provided the company doesn't go bust, it's all fine.
They are, but wasn't there some concern about one of the companies that were with?
Yeah.
Jerry was.
So
Yeah.
I think again, it's worth revisiting next month just to see what the lay of the land is. But there's no point changing it at the moment.
Okay.
What else have we moved on to? I threw out the idea last time at 7,001 at someone else in the maintenance department. And I threw a number in of 25,000, which is probably too high. Again, that's a big conversation.
So I was saying that figure will be 25% higher than.
Yep, no, absolutely. As I said, it was just a number I threw out.
So do you want to drop that to?
Well,
Sorry, you've lost me.
Okay,
Where
I'm
you
on
are.
line 7001,
Yeah,
maintenance salary AM grade 5. So this was a suggestion that I threw out in the shopping list last month of having an extra pair of hands to do maintenance work. It hasn't been discussed, so.
Yeah, I was going to say, well, should we have not been discussing this in personnel first before we?
Well, we don't need to discuss this at all necessarily. It can be 0 on this because it was just an idea. And it's not an idea that estates has discussed in any way, shape or form. But the reason I'm raising it is that then raises one of the numbers later on. So if it is 0, then it should make us a saving later on as well as a saving there.
Well, I think we should be, instead of leaving 25,000 in something that we haven't really talked about or discussed or even know what that person's going to be doing, I think you should take it out. Because
That's
I
fine.
think, I know we've got some issues that we want to make the cemetery better, but I think you've already put some money in there with
Yeah, no, that's
somebody to help.
I'm taking it out.
Yeah,
And that then has.
I mean, it'd be lovely, yeah, if we, lovely to have another person, but I just think it should come from a different place. It should come from a plan that you need, and this is why we need that person. So then we fit it into a budget, not just pluck a
The
figure
only
out.
reason I'm highlighting it is if we take it out and then you come down to line 7011, that number reduces again.
And as well, that person's going to be earning more than our senior maintenance operator
As I said, it was
and our
just a
current
number.
operator.
Yeah. So if you take 25 out, then that lower increase comes down as well as 10,948. 7100 telephones in here.
so if we can just go back to, so you've got that wage increase plus scale 5%. That's, because they've all gone up anyway. So what's that?
That's the budgetary figure from Danny Moody was to allow for a 5% increase. And the personnel committee just now said that we'll support that as a number for the budget at the moment.
But what's the increase that's already in there then?
For 22-23, it's 5%. It's on the top column of the line 4.
I don't
of
understand why
column.
there's 2 increases. So at an individual level, everyone's salary's gone up, and then there's this general increase which says wage increase. Why are there both?
That's the amount, that's the total amount.
That's the total amount, I think.
So why hasn't it been done by person then?
That's a good question. So, Paul, if we look
Your
at
5% increase on 5% increase, or however much the increases already are, aren't you? Looking at the how the way it's
I
counted.
wasn't is this related to personnel? So I wasn't-
no, it's just on the spreadsheet question.
Paul,
My-
you know when you did the salaries, did
Yeah.
you increase everybody's salary by 5%?
It's that figure, it's all of those figures, which is
Yeah,
everything
you increase it
plus
by
3% plus 5%.
3 plus 5.
Because at the moment, the current wages haven't increased because the figure hasn't been agreed as yet.
No.
So I suppose the question is that 10,948 a double count? Or is it,
It depends on what increase comes through when, when the wages are agreed at NJC level. At the moment, that hasn't been agreed yet, has it? That might not be agreed,
But that's not for 22-23. That's for current year, isn't it?
yeah. So that figure there, hang on a sec.
But if you change that K4 figure to
Yeah,
7%, would it change all the salaries and that line?
it would, because that figure was the same. That figure for an individual includes a 5% increase, and then that figure also includes a 5% increase. So that's effectively a 10% increase, because I didn't know what you were going to be agreeing.
We've agreed a 5%, so that figure, the way it says 5%, you can come out, I assume.
So if you want me
Because
to
if the individual salary has gone up by 5%,
I can take that 5%.
that's what we've agreed.
So if you-
But Paul is also right to say that the increase for 21-22 hasn't been agreed, and it may be more than you've currently got built into the 21-22 budget.
it might be,
So
yeah.
if I look at 7002, where 23,500 goes to 24,000, that can be wrong, and then it has a knock-on effect on, an additional 5% going.
How don't we put in, have we got 3% increase for last year?
We did on the budget,
Yeah.
Was it 3% or 2%? I think it went up by 2% last year.
Oh, did it? Oh, I thought it was
I
3.
think our budget was agreed at 2%. I think,
Yeah, it looks like
on the basis that
Yeah.
we didn't have it.
But at the moment, it's looking like it's 1.75, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's 1.75.
Oh, so you're covered
At the moment.
in
So we've
21.
just covered, yeah.
Yeah.
And they said they're not going to
Yeah.
change it, and that's going to go to a vote.
So in theory, we should be okay. So we could leave that extra 10,000 in just in case at the moment and revisit it.
Yeah,
in
because
December.
the personnel committee did say that they would potentially,
But then
add a
that
bit
should
more.
be in those first columns, shouldn't it?
Mm.
So let's leave it at the moment, but we'll revisit in December if it needs to stay or not.
So the amount is showing what it's got there on the red note, wage increase 5%, plus a scale of 5%. And as you say,
Telephones. I think I'm right in saying nearly every room in the building has a telephone in it, and we pay a line rental on every one of them.
not necessarily.
Not necessarily,
No.
okay.
I answered that in your email.
You did, and that's around it. So the little room down the end there, which has got a phone in, is it the Parliament room?
What-
Cost room.
Costa. Do we need a phone in there? Do we pay for that phone in there?
The way to find out is go in there, phone it on your mobile, see which number comes up. We've got 10 different lines in here, of which we'd probably pay for about 5.
Okay.
So I suspect that's an attachment to one of the other ones. But the only way to find out, as I said in the email, is phone it on your mobile and see which number comes up.
I couldn't work out if we've got a lot of telephones while we've increased the budget up to
Because it
3,000.
covers us for, I think, 6 lines, 6 separate lines coming into Fletton House.
Mhm.
Also for the lift line, also for the line at the courthouse line as well, for the care line.
So that comes into this one.
Yeah, so if the lift, somebody rings the emergency button in the
I
lift.
thought it came to courthouse, sorry. I thought it was just.
As well as we can't cover it.
Okay.
They just took over.
Well, I'll leave that at 3,000 then. Stationery, with everyone tapping away on computers now, do we need it to be quite so high? Can we drop that to 400, for example?
Feasibly, it has been coming down over the past 3 years, understandably, so up to 300.
Any way of saving money?
Yeah.
Photocopying and scanning, I asked about this recently, I'm not sure we can reduce it, but it seemed, if everyone's just emailing things for everyone,
Well, we pay, we use it and pay,
okay,
so there's an offset in income.
so there's no way, okay, that's fine.
We're probably bigger users of it
Um,
than council.
You are.
Probably.
Yeah, but, we're charged that back, so.
Yeah.
The comms website notice board, we've got 2,000 in there. I was going to ask a question about that, I can't remember what it was. Put it in mind.
2,000, the annual cost for 2022 will be about £700, web hosting 400, electronic notice board, 108, that comes to 1,200 quid, and just leaving a bit of flexibility.
Okay.
But
There's
you
another
can,
question about comms, I can't remember what it was. Get my note back. Professional membership fees, 7108, 8240. I've seen there's not much wiggle room there with anything now. Does that include the in-calc?
Well, why is it up so much?
there's all the costs there, rather than me reading them all out. Personnel payroll, workplace pension, annual fee, Aviva pensions, West Street to the ship licence, health and safety, eye tests, acre, gambling annual fee, data protection.
So two of the fees haven't been paid this year, have they? Because of COVID, is that right? I read that somewhere.
Which two of those have been?
I'm sure I read it
Does
somewhere.
that cover the PPL?
licenses.
PR?
Yeah,
Can't
EPL.
remember about that.
So all those numbers on the little box come to 4976, and
Yeah.
we've got 8,240. So I suppose the question is.
Because on professional membership fees, you can always get additional professional fees, you know how much things cost from people in that sort of profession.
So that covers us for other
It's a bit of
costs.
flexibility, yeah.
Okay, that's fine.
So, but isn't it, I've got 28,487 in the budget.
Oh, that was because there's a rugby club resolution which will theoretically cost £5,000 and transport study 15.
Oh, yes, then I've left those out because hopefully we can
Okay.
pay for those this year. Would that be feasible? Since we know they're coming and we approved the transport study in theory last.
You can do, but obviously it means that there'll be less money and you've got an 8,200 budget, you spend 5,500, but if it comes through this year, it comes through this year.
So that technically leaves only £3,000 in that budget, which I think the transport study is going to be a lot more than that.
Yeah, it is.
But they agreed that that should be paid from reserves.
General reserves.
Yeah.
They did.
So we don't, none of us appointed, we don't need to budget for next year, particularly if we're looking like we might
So
have
it's
to
No.
this year.
Because we're expensive.
So I'd say we take the 15,000 out.
Yeah.
The rugby club.
So
13,
15,000 out.
already something.
Yeah, because we know that's coming from somewhere else, hopefully this year.
So just the 15k coming out.
Sorry, where's that removed from? I lost it.
Line
Professional
7108.
fee, professional
7,108.
fees.
Professional.
No, the professional.
7108.
7109, subs conference fees, I've highlighted this, but I've left it at 29, is that on this?
The last one is 27.
I suppose I'm just saying, can you knock it down a little bit rather than increasing it so much, but
500 quid.
When you look at the last 4 years, it's been 2.5, 3002, 3003, 2009.
okay, no, that's fine. Travelling expenses, next one down, says we don't, and hopefully we'll be doing less travelling. Is it worth, it was 1980 so far, I know it was COVID times, but should we go 300? I'll put 300. Be ambitious and do more Teams and Zoom and stuff like that.
I would agree, yeah.
With climate emergency and all that sort of stuff, we should be driving on this. So 300, you can go
300.
less.
So what's that for?
Travelling expenses, 7110.
Does that include if I went to my travelling expenses? So like if I went to a conference?
Yes, it would.
Or are they classed as meeting? No, meeting. I'll leave it at
Travelling
500.
Leave it at
expenses.
I'll leave it at 500.
Yeah.
We've blown the budget.
Come away from 800, leave it at 500.
Come well under budget each year. We've either gone way over the top or way over.
Yeah, what have we spent in the last few years?
And then
Yeah, we haven't been anywhere.
No, of course we won't, no.
Haven't been anywhere, so,
2018 was £1,200.
but 100 miles, say, to a conference.
I'll leave it at 500.
If you look at the
A
last
couple of them a
4
year,
years,
I don't know, just trying to think.
We've blown the budget those years, didn't we? So it's 300, 400, 500.
I think we reduced the budget, says
Okay, let's go 500 then.
Mhm.
People think. Mayor's expenses, I don't think I could ever spend £1,000 even if I tried, so
I told Malcolm it's going to be top quality champagne on your Christmas leave.
Well, as long as nothing.
It wouldn't come otherwise.
As long as enough people come, that's fine.
No, at the moment, you're the only ones.
No, we're over Prosecco, it's everybody else that gets.
So I've said 750 for that at the moment, we can be frugal there. Meeting expenses,
is that agreed? Because before it was always £1,000 minimum for.
it just
Well,
seems,
my recollection was an element of that was sort of automatically given, and the rest
Yeah.
was only, expenses that were available to the mayor.
It used to be £1,500.
We haven't spent 1,000 since 2017.
Sorry, I didn't, what was that?
For
Half of
mayor's
it's
expenses.
automatically given, so you should have had, I didn't know that.
It's cash under.
That's never happened
I'm looking for the brown.
while I've been here.
They're not brand works anymore,
When
they're
it was introduced, and it was quite a few years ago, it happened because, frankly, mayors were spending quite a lot of money on travelling around, buying gifts to
Yeah.
take to places and so on, didn't have a budget.
Yeah,
And then I think it hit its nadir when I went out to France to our twin, and it was absolutely fated and was sort of given various things, and I'd gone out there with absolutely no budget, no anything. I was literally, sort of, it was like a presidential cavalcade going down the street, and I thought, I'm never putting another mayor in that position. And I think we then sort of developed a budget around it, but it was always the idea that I think half of the budget was given as of right, and then the rest of it was simply available if you needed to spend it on things. Because there are some things that the council does that technically it hasn't got any power to do, so you put it into the mayor's allowance and the mayor pays for it out of that. But of course, not every mayor is always claimed their allowance.
No one's spending plenty for ages. But even if that idea continued, it could be 750 rather than 1,000. And if next year we get a more expensive mayor, then we can put up the year after. So I propose 750.
I'll
I'm
leave
sure
it
that's.
Yeah.
Well, I think if it comes from the mayor proposing it,
exactly.
he's cutting
Because
the
we
mayor, why
don't-
should I complain?
That's kind of taking a pay cut, isn't it?
Yeah.
One of them.
Under 750.
750.
I think that should be the highlight of the budget. The mayor cuts his own
Yeah,
allowance.
cuts his
Oh,
own
that's the
allowance.
headline on what we would put out.
Well, that was one of the things that was complained about last year.
What, that'd be too low?
No, the mayor's allowance, why did we have one? No, I explained that it was left in case the mayor had expenses. But it's not always spent.
Tyres free down my bike.
Take a bottle of Chablis somewhere.
Down the river. Meeting expenses, I've reduced this to 250. I don't know why, it seemed a good idea. What are meeting
Is it all
expenses?
these meetings? with
No,
meeting
I think,
stuff?
isn't it for like the annual town meeting and,
Okay.
and then obviously with, any, we've had the odd extraordinary town meeting where, we lay on tea and coffee and stuff. It's not a huge amount of money,
I
but
think it's worth leaving.
Yeah, fine.
It's been substantial.
So is that leaving?
I'm not the mayor's allowance anymore, yeah. Staff training, we've gone up to 2,400, which is an allocation of 200.
£200 per staff member, which is part of Emma's training strategy.
Okay.
it's not a
How
huge
many
amount
staff
of
have
money.
we got?
Sorry?
How many staff have we got? 8.
We only have 7 now because we've obviously since last year that we've lost her staff.
Is that 7 plus you?
No, I think it includes me.
Okay. So would that be 1,400 rather than 2,400?
I know we should know how many. Is it 7 we've got?
I think it's-
I've
think
got
we said it
7
was
now.
7
I think
last
it's
time,
7
didn't we?
now. I'm sure it was more. Let me just count.
I mean, it says in your
It's
notes,
8.
staff 8 times
It's
200 as
Yeah.
per training strategy, identified needs plus contingency takes it to
We've got 8
2,100.
staff.
That's about right.
It's 7.
It's 8.
This is why the budget's
You count them out.
Right. Me, you,
Yeah.
Lisa,
Yeah.
Karen, Rebecca, Deborah. Yes, it's 8.
That could have been all.
We'll leave the accounting of Paul then.
Yes. Okay, so we'll keep that as it is, and that's fine. Recruitment publicity, we've got I've got £1,800, and I think the wife's got £1,800. I suppose keep it the same. What do we spend money on for publicity advertising? Is that for jobs or for other things?
There's generally things like all the stuff that goes into
At the
not
time.
the Oracle, the Powerful News and things like that.
That's all.
And that's-
It's also a budget for newspaper advertising and things if we are replacing.
Budget headings are on.
And tenders. If you have to go out for tenders.
Just struck me that most years we've spent under 2,000. So,
Apart from 2020, which is 2008.
Which is fine. Because
well,
standard
if people want to
years.
keep it the same, that's
And
fine.
then it's up to you, you're going through it.
Well,
What's the general view in the room?
Well, I just know what was that?
Are we still on publicity?
Yeah, I've reduced that to 1,800. It's
As long as there's a
up to
budget, a
121.
decent,
Yeah.
1800 seems fine.
Okay.
Don't want to say. it's-
Marketplace clocks, I thought that wasn't enough, but apparently the service is less than that, so that's
We
fine.
used to have a service every year, they just haven't done it for the past 4 years, but we did have a,
I think we have
Nothing
started,
happened.
yeah, but it wasn't
Should-
working for a long time, but I think now we're back on track.
Back on service, excellent. Tourism, 25,000. This is Christmas Fair.
Christmas,
Can
yeah.
we, well,
We
as
put it
we're,
at
as we're on the line for bad debts, can we have an understanding of what 412 is?
Yeah, what we
Who is
Those-
paying?
propose
Who is paying?
Those are our bad debts for the last 7 or 8 years. It's generally about one a year.
Italian market or
Or a
Yeah.
culture,
We did write horticulture off.
yeah, that was the £86 we wrote off. Prior to that, an Italian market guy turned up and sold his wares, but didn't pay his invoice.
So why aren't they just being agreed to be written off then?
How do you mean? No,
Why can't they be-
those are the bad debts that have been happen written off. That's how much the
Oh,
bad
I
debts were in those
see.
years.
Ah.
So
Right.
you're,
Right.
Yeah.
you're allowing £424 for future bad debts.
Yeah.
Right.
Or you can reduce those. Again, your
what did we have
choice.
last year?
Last
Or-
year was just one, £86.
£86. The year before was 221. Am I reading that?
Yeah,
So
the
that-
231 was
231,
one
sorry.
invoice.
That 412 is not a known number, that is your forecast.
No, that was based on the budget of 400,
Yeah.
increased by 3%.
Mhm.
But it can, I was just working
Can't
on the
leave it.
basis there might be a few more with COVID.
Councillors' expenses training, that's allowing 150 per councillor, 14 of us.
£200 per councillor. Is that-
Oh, I've changed it to 150, that's what I've done. Does it need to be 200? Could it be a bit less?
That's the strategy which Emma's agreed.
It's,
But it also seems a bit strange if you put a training budget for the staff at 200 each. I don't see the logic of it not being the same for council.
yeah, I agree.
Okay.
There's plenty
I
of
just thought
courses
This
out
is
there.
expenses, not just training. So we were talking wine over.
Shadow.
Yeah, because I mean, yeah, if you have to travel, I know we haven't had to travel, and I think they're still doing quite a few.
Events or something.
But yeah, they will be.
I've done something to
So part of the tourism, what did you want to do with Christmas? Do you want to keep increasing Christmas and get it bigger and better? Or are you going
what's it? 25,000 seems, I think, save £750.
What's that for Christmas?
you can spend as much
So
as you want.
to me, I know it sounds stupid, shouldn't tourism just be for Christmas?
No.
Well, because if we're spending 25,000 this year on
I think it
Christmas,
also used to be
If
out
it
in
was,
blue.
The events,
Yeah.
it's all the events, wasn't it? Yeah.
it just that there hasn't been very many events recently,
No,
but it should cover everything, or it does cover everything.
to cover the literature that we support, things like that.
No, come out of the grants budget.
Oh, right, okay.
This Christmas market costs, some things will go into that.
Yeah, sometimes it acts as a bit of a buffer, doesn't it? Helps. If we,
I just kept it at 25,000 to keep it nice and round.
Yeah.
So you want that one dropping to 25?
Yeah, just shave a little bit here, shave a little bit
Yeah,
there,
yeah.
spread the pain. I've got pest control costs, 7,229. I've moved that to 300, but I'm not entirely sure why.
7229.
Because that's pretty much what we're spending.
That's because it's changed. Same changed.
But I don't know if pest control is likely to go up. Or what's
Depends how you
depends if we get a rat infestation.
No, I'll send my
It
cat.
says contract,
It's going
doesn't
to
it?
increase on those.
Oh, is that a yearly contract?
Yeah, it's the yearly
That's the
contract.
yearly
I don't
contract.
know whether we that's,
That's not something to change.
Yeah.
Yearly contract, I would say. That's control contract.
it's not ad hoc, that's for the annual contract.
That's what we
But it
get.
also adds anything, any unusual,
Yeah.
like that was
That's-
also
The
nice.
contract's 151.44 this year, according to economy.
projected, yeah.
Yeah.
To get, to have a wasp nest removed, you're talking about £50-60.
And if there was any kind of infestation, then it's a lot more.
Well, what do you think, Lex? Over to you.
350.
350. Okay.
It's all that.
Maintenance contracts, leave that as it is. I don't know what I've changed that. I have furniture, equipment. You've said in here, Paul, there's a rolling program.
Yeah.
What's the ongoing upgrade?
Well, this was £5 agreed last year to get some additional furniture for Fletton House when things break.
I think it was when some of the hub furniture was breaking. And I think it's maybe upgrading that, but obviously that's a different.
I've moved it to 2,500,
Situation.
but I've also asked a question about if there's any, you know, 'cause Councillor Fuller's looked at IT and mics and stuff. Do we need to keep it at 5,000 to help cover some of those costs maybe? I don't know. I don't know which way to
This
go.
is equipment, yeah.
Do we know what the
So-
quote is? I think I've heard some very large figures
I
again.
don't know too, but I think there are cheaper alternatives. So whether it's worth keeping it at 5,000, including any IT in that, or whether it's worth reducing it and just saying that's what we're doing. Liz?
Yeah, because actually, I think you skipped over 7124, I don't remember you talking about it. So 7124, which is computer expenses, where, again, there's a budget of 6,000 odd, which it doesn't look as if, well, I don't know, it doesn't look as if it's all going to be spent. And then another 6,500.
Yeah, but that's because we don't automatically carry over.
Yeah.
So that is what, that yellow figure is what we would have to spend for next year.
Yeah, I understand. Well, I kind of understand, except why, what is that, what is in that? Because it seems very variable year to year, so it sounds like it's a cost that can be controlled.
I suppose there are probably increased regular costs, aren't there, with servers and.
Well, we had to have a new server, didn't we?
The computer costs now cover all of us, every councillor, and all of our emails, Microsoft 365, and we have a standard cost of about 250 quid a month or something to cover for all of those. And also, if anything goes wrong, I had a problem with Excel a couple of weeks ago where it just, the formulas weren't working. It was a link between us and Sage, which had broken. I phoned Sean, he goes with it. Any kind of issue, and they're very, very good. And he's there at 7:30.
So there's some fixed costs of 5,300 a year. It's a bit more. So maybe,
So like if you have to replace a laptop or something.
maybe, you know, it could be that we decide that if there are any IT upgrades or AV upgrades in here, we look to this year's budget of equipment and a bit of IT to pay for it. If we can't, we move it on and reduce next year. I don't know. Until we know what those numbers are, it's hard to know, isn't it?
I mean, most of my laptop's nearly 5 years, well, coming up 5 years old too. So that potentially could be one, but yours is relatively new, isn't it? Everybody else has had a new.
Sean's argument was always if your computer's less than 3 years old, it might be worth doing something with. Anything more than 3 years old, get a new one.
So 3 years is the magic number, I think. So do you want to keep furniture and equipment at 5,000, but be ready for some IT spend in that as well? Or do you want to lower that? It's all different pots, I suppose, isn't it?
Well, it's, I'm back to my argument of it's 5,000 and 5,000, and, you know, I've heard Emma tell me 100 times, you know, that it's because you're starting all over again and you're not carrying it forward, but I refuse to look at it that way. So that looks to me like £10,000 has been precepted over 2 years to pay for furniture and equipment at Fletton House on top, and that doesn't have to include anything technical. That's being included in
computer expenses,
Yeah.
7124.
12,500 over 2 years precepted in another line. So I do question whether there's 5,000, a need for 5,000 this year and 5,000 next year.
Is it prudent, therefore, to make next year 2.5, but say that if there's 5,000 or some of the 5,000 left over from this year, we can roll it over?
Well, I mean, have you got identified needs on what the furniture and equipment?
No.
No.
So it's unlikely we'll spend that 5,000 unless it's on AV stuff or
Yeah.
computer stuff.
Whereas I think you could probably, I don't know, you could probably bring that down quite small, but then you maybe put a little bit more in your IT budget. Because
It's just that, I'm assuming that this column projected 21-22 profit and loss, that's going to give me at the end of all of this, the projected reserves, isn't it? Yeah. And I'm very interested in what that number is, because as I've said 10 times already, I would like to start earmarking those reserves or designating them, or whatever word you want to use, and not just say there's a general reserve and we didn't spend 5,000 on furniture, but never mind, we'll put it in the general reserve and we'll never see it again. It reduces the precept for the next year. Because that 5,000 always was intended for furniture equipment. Okay, so we didn't spend it in 21-22. We spent it in 22-23. I mustn't get too caught up in the years, but I know we have to get caught up in the years.
So just to move things around, should we put computer expenditure next year at 10,000, which is 5,500 plus some laptop and AV stuff, and put Fletner House at 1,000, which is
How much you say for computer expenses?
10. So that's gone
I think
up
it's
a
much
bit.
more likely
That's
that
more-
that's.
I think that's where you
That's
spend the
just-
money,
that's
rather
gone
than
up
a
a
table or a
This has
chair.
gone down a
Say
bit,
about computer.
but there's still a bit in
Yeah,
reserve
yeah,
in case.
Yeah.
Okay, so 10,000 on line 7124,
I've just had 2 of my office chairs break. I mean, you
and
just never know.
7235 becomes the rate.
People are getting so heavy these days. No, it's
Um,
not
COVID.
Couple more, and then
Codes,
I'm done. 7246, we've got R&M on Fletner House.
Yeah.
Which you've got a substantial number due to repainting
No,
and and windows.
it was your AV 7,000 plus repairs and maintenance 20 grand, and that came from your figures, I think.
I don't know, but R&M against Fletner House. So, I mean, what needs doing?
Well, this
Because all-
building hasn't been decorated. We've done a little bit of touching up, and I mean, I've got cracks in my room. You've got cracks in your room.
You've got a hole in your office.
Yeah, I've got holes in my room.
developing on.
We need an extra maintenance.
But you know,
Yes,
this is a wedding venue, and it's not been decorated or painted for since you moved in.
How many people get married in your house every year?
5 a year. We've got to make up for that nails expensive.
So
Can we get, yeah.
I mean,
that's
you know, and you could
Have a
easily.
budget.
But
I've moved at 7.5.
estates though should agree, shouldn't they, whether there's a refurbishment
Yeah.
plan, or whatever
Yeah.
you call it, a redecoration plan for Fletner House. So
Fletner
if
House.
the estates say, yes, we think there should be, then
Then we look. for
then we
we've got.
understand why we've got 27,000.
Because I mean, that should have been picked. You probably picked up some things on your site visit, because the outside, the fascia boards and things like that are not.
Well, I've moved it down to 7,500, which is still, I mean, I could make this room.
But you've got rotting fascia. I'll just tell you, you've got rotting fascia. But you've got one that's hanging off.
But
Yeah.
weren't they meant to be dealt with a year or 2 ago? I'm sure maybe COVID got on, I'm sure we approved fascia boards. We had long conversations down there about fascia boards at some point.
There's been no budget earmarked
Literally.
for it. I mean, it was probably looked at, but I don't know. It might have been before COVID, and then it, you know, I don't know, it
Have
got
we
put
spent
back.
much over the last 5 years on this?
But
Probably haven't.
I agree. The Estates Committee should have a plan for
Four, nine,
for refurbishment
four,
of
that's
all
it,
the properties.
Can we reduce off 27 to say 15 then?
Yeah, we've got some unknowns, we've got some unknowns, haven't we?
Yeah, this is a huge building. I mean, anything you do on this level, you're going to have full scale scaffolding put up.
On the outside,
Or
or the
the
inside.
Yeah.
The whole building doesn't need repainting.
I don't know, that's assessment we have to make.
No, fair enough. Well, it's up to everyone else. I think it's.
Compromise, 25.
Well, did you say it was 27 and blame it on me? So
We'll take that 7 out, because wasn't that put
so
in for
20.
the AV?
It's AV 7,000.
And I think-
thought we just put that in.
we just put that.
Let's put that on.
But I think
Yeah.
that was
Seven off.
I think it's going to be a lot more than that, isn't it?
Well,
What the AV is,
it won't.
Yeah.
It won't on this much.
But if we were going to go for the cheap option, yeah.
So let's make that 20,000 then.
But can you from this committee given instruction, please, to estates?
So that we
Yeah, I
can,
think-
we can, we can,
Yeah, I think
yeah,
you
plan
should.
for this building.
Who's going to tell them?
Well, I'm just wondering, I'm
Well,
directing
the
that,
thing-
Heather,
that-
can you do that, please? Or-
Yeah, the whole idea of your estates walkabout is you go round unless, and this is the plan.
We went a lot of places, a lot of time.
But it takes a long time.
It does.
Yeah, and then it takes a plan being put together. Ultimately, because you start it you do it in the summer, so that by now
Yeah.
you've got it.
Yeah, yeah. We were not.
Quickly moving on, I've got to go somewhere. 7271 events. I don't know what it is, we haven't spent it for years. So rather than, I shaved £500 off it and made it £500, 7271.
The plan was we were going to have some events here, but there aren't any events.
Wouldn't that come in? But if we had events, wouldn't that come under tourism?
Or do Christmas event,
This was
That's
specifically
going
for
to
Fletton
be
House.
desperate to spend it somehow.
Christmas event.
So just make that zero for the moment, or is it worth having 500 quid just in case?
You can
We
take
have
it out
got
to
the
the
Jubilee.
It depends whether
coming
you're
up.
going to give me my 30,000 for a hub.
I've cut
In which
that
case,
as well.
I'll.
David just made a good point, we've got
Well,
Jubilee coming up.
wouldn't it
Probably
be-
leave some of
It's
it.
in there, it's in there, don't worry, it's in
I
there.
just don't know. It's not.
Let's make it zero then. And
I
come
think
back
if we
to-
were going to put an event on, it would. We
You
wouldn't
wouldn't
just
choose
have
it
it
because it's not
specific for
decorated.
Fletton House. Yeah, no, we wouldn't have it exclusive.
Tea.
That's the event, we're going to paint the building together.
But I think you take it out of the tourism budget.
Yeah,
Let's make that zero then.
Yeah.
Okay, saving.
yeah.
7273 marketing, that 10,000 is the Jubilee, I think, isn't it?
Yeah, leave that.
And there are conversations going on, that seems fine. Fletton House office equipment, I put 200 in, just because I'm stingy,
Yeah.
rather than tourists, whatever it is.
Two.
And then hub promotions, I've knocked this down to 25,000, rather than 30.
You said 25 to 30 as one for the
Yeah, that's fine.
worst case.
And my own feeling is that it should be not entirely matched, but there should also be an income line. Because the majority of that is to fund a community hub manager, and they will be tasked with fundraising and putting on events where, either you hopefully
Yeah.
make a little bit of money. So
Yeah, the only danger with that, if you look down some of those hub columns, we've got the wet and dry thing, to put the event on, to buy the coffee to serve it, it's going to cost extra, so. Yeah, I mean, 25 seemed a.
What's the
reasonable
third?
target.
What does the? You said it's 25,000. What does that cover?
for me, I'll have to get my paper up, but I think I was allowing a part-time community hub manager.
So that would
and
be a
some
salary.
Yeah, a salary, part-time salary. And I've looked up, what it might be, and full-time, they're likely to earn around 25 plus on costs. So 20, let's say 25. And then 5 is just to get going with some supplies and putting in the vending machine and just making sure that they've got what they need. But it's most likely to be spent on advertising and things like that, I would say, going out and meeting people. And they're going to need a budget to get them going, but they would be tasked with finding funding to offset part of their own costs. It's absolutely standard in the charity world that you find funding to pay for your salary.
So it would be a charity, it would be somebody running a chat.
Well, I mean, I think we could need to get advice on,
Mm.
whether that's how doable that would be.
Yeah.
By keeping it within the entirely within the remit of Hamilton Town Council, we would potentially reduce our options on
Yeah.
funding for sure. But people like the National Lottery will fund councils.
Mhm.
With respect, I'm somewhat puzzled. I thought Liz had been asked and had agreed to produce a paper giving firm proposals for the future usage of the hub. No such paper has come our way yet. Yes,
It's,
Liz,
I
a couple of
think-
seconds ago, gave clear indications as to how she saw usage of the hub going ahead. I
I
don't
think
understand.
the paper's going to be.
Just the trailer, thanks.
So 25 seemed to limit our expenditure, but I thought the meeting last time was supportive of the idea of doing something now. And then anything on
That's
top
fine,
of
in which
that,
case I won't ask for an income line.
I was going to say the alternative is to
Well,
give
I
us a
mean-
30,000 but put 5,000 in the income line.
Yeah.
It produces the same figure,
Yeah.
but actually it's closer to what you're suggesting. So I think we should do it that way,
that's fine.
for the purposes of now.
What have an as well.
So you have a 30,000 expenditure as now, but you have a £5,000 income line against it.
And if they don't get the 5,000,
Yeah, sure.
fingers off, shot.
Oh,
Finger
okay.
first, that's a warning. Okay, so net effect the same. Now,
Thank you.
it strikes me that from the precept of an increase of £10 million, or whatever it was, which was frightening, but it was all my ideas, that comes down to a more reasonable, I think about 15-16% increase, which is still a lot, but given what's what, 17.21. That
So-
seems better, but it seems more targeted.
What's the figure now?
The increase for band D on those numbers would be 17.21% increase.
Yeah.
Which is not ideal, but it's 30 quid a year. And I think if we explain it relatively decently in that.
Go back to Lizzie's point about the sort of carry forward figure, because every year, historically, we have a not insignificant underspend. And I, for one, would look at 17%. I mean, I don't fault in the sense the logic of that's taken us there. But is there scope for taking funds out of reserves?
I think so,
Absolutely.
definitely.
Absolutely.
Because if you put a reserve transfer in of £10,000 or £20,000 or what have you, you could bring that percentage down fairly dramatically. So as long as there's enough there to be able to fulfil our sort of normal requirement to say we want 3 months operating costs held in reserve, then I would be more in favour of having a transfer from reserves and trying to cut back on some of the precept.
Yeah, that seems eminently reasonable. Because I think the prism of keeping the precept increase low is important with all the economic problems that people are facing. But, I mean, I showed, £10 off here, £20 off here, and we got to a better figure, but it's still quite a chunk. And having money sitting in the bank that's perhaps unnecessarily there is, let's push it in to make that even lower. I think that's eminently sensible.
There's a few things. Those are your unspent budgets, which come to nearly £100,000.
You either have to make that bigger or black, I can't read what's in white and grey over as well.
So that's the unspent budget at the moment.
At the moment.
I can't, where are we now?
96.
So at the moment, we've got 16,500 unspent on flat house stuff, which might be whatever those walls are there, I can't remember, or whatever.
Maintenance windows.
Tourism 24/7, but the Christmas market is yet to come out of that, I suppose. And lots of money on car parks, which could cover our car parks expenditure once we know what they are next year. So that gives us an underspend of 96,000, which is going to become 70,000.
That money will be carried forward unless we spend none of it.
So,
How much do you have to transfer from reserves to get to a sort of notional 5% increase?
That's going to be a lot.
But the other impact you have is the money that could feasibly come through section 106 makes a massive difference.
Yeah.
Which is effectively underpinning what you're doing and brings it down dramatically.
As long as we get approval.
Yeah, exactly.
but that is sort of restricted on what you could spend
And
on.
also, the numbers I've just played with didn't really allow
No,
for any of those areas of expenditure purposely, because I assume.
yeah, they don't even this year.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So there's no accessible play equipment, there's no skate park.
It's only the impact on reserves at the end of the year.
So this would be a straight reserve transfer. So somewhere between 5 and 7% sounds like a really good number to sell, particularly with
So
electricity.
I'm certainly in favour of keeping it in single figures,
Yeah.
Fine.
under 10.
Can we task Paul with an ambition of a single figure?
What, the
percent
percentage?
Yeah,
Yeah.
under 10.
So what figure you want?
Based on the transfer from reserves.
Yeah,
Okay,
Let's
Give
say
us a few options.
5,
5, 6, 7%.
those are three you want,
Yeah.
5, 6 and 7.
How much would the reserve transfer need to be on those figures?
Yeah.
Because I feel I could stand up if I had to somewhere and say, we're still delivering good quality services, we're rewarding the staff, we're spending money on good things for the town, which will improve our facilities, we're looking after our buildings, but we're aware of the preset costs and we've balanced it in about the right way. And it struck me, at least when I was playing with these, that those were defendable choices.
Does that take into consideration anything that we want to carry forward?
No,
That's what we're now,
Yeah,
that's what Paul's
that's
now
where you
trying
are.
to.
So, yeah, so we
Yeah,
need
separate.
to, because if we are going to start doing that and doing that properly,
Yeah,
then that will help the precept going forward.
exactly.
If we don't, we can't keep drawing 50, 60,000 from our general reserves to try and keep the precept low.
Yeah,
If
absolutely.
you want to do a particular thing,
But remember, we've got some big one-offs in here. We've got restarting the hub in a way. We've got toilet refurbishment, which in theory could drop out if next year we chose to drop them out and not replace them, and then the reserves wouldn't be needed again. So in a way, that's what we're sort of pushing over. But that's something we certainly need to be aware of. And the Jones Strong estates are doing that. Everything's
But we
on
have
estates.
said we're putting in money. I said, could you earmark, so when you look at, I'm hoping you'll do that sheet at the bottom, which is called section 106, where it's actually all reserves, isn't it?
Yeah.
So if that gets revamped as well, please.
Yeah.
So that,
So if we can do these percentages and including or not including, say, 25 for Jones Strong, just to keep in the back pocket year on year.
only if it can be found from the general reserve and not precepted.
yeah,
Absolutely. And then at least
But
we'll
that
know
may,
what the landscape
you
is.
know, may give David a bit less than his reserve transfer that would reduce it to 5.
But again, if
But
we can
it's
explain,
going to be a compromise, anyway.
it's 6% rather than 5%, but we're putting money aside for the scouts. That's reasonable. We're not putting away for the mayor's fund. That's the main thing.
So 5, 6, 7%, and keep 25 grand from James Strong Centre
In case.
in case
Yep.
anything else. But everything else you're happy with in terms of,
Yeah, and that gives us 10,000 a year for the walls, which we put
Yeah.
up a little bit. It allows us to dabble in the hub or not. It gives us some knowledge of the cemetery in some way, with
Yeah.
warden of some sort, and a defendable. And after an 0% increase last year, with increased electricity and gas costs, etc., you know, 5 or 6% is better enough.
Average out between the 2 years at about the rate of inflation, I suspect.
Yeah, which is pretty good, I suppose. Do we need to do any more than that? at the minute?
no, because now
We've been
that
forward,
takes, some working out and discussing and various things. So I think this will come back to the December
Finance.
finance meeting,
do you need this before council next week?
because we won't be in a position to approve it, I would have thought, because we've not made any
There's
recommendations,
specific things that we're going to take.
yeah.
But we feels like we're quite close.
But hopefully, well, I know it's a really long, drawn out process, but the only way to really understand it and go through it is to just go down line by line.
It's boring, but
I know,
but also it does give you a really good understanding of what's what.
yeah,
And you suddenly see where it goes and you think,
and you find things like, £5,000 for furniture in here, and then when you actually sit here and think, well, what does that cover?
Yeah.
You think, well, we don't.
But
need
also
that.
it's useful for estates to think, well, we haven't been pushing that and
Yeah.
the balls.
Well, it's due diligence, isn't it?
Yeah.
If people ask you the question, what are you doing about this? You can say, well, actually, we talked about that last week.
Yeah.
And this is what we think we might want to do with it. We're going to discuss it at a later meeting. But
Yeah.
in a good chance, we've got the budget, we know what we're doing.
Agree.
Before I get told off for going over 9:30, which it now is, are there any other items for a report? Liz?
No, thank you. I've covered it.
Rupert?
No, thank you.
David? Anything from anyone else? 21:30. I consider it closed. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.